Hi everybody and welcome back to Clever Melon. We are covering episode 6 of our Introduction to Business series today, and we're going to be looking at part 3 to our mini-series covering business and economics. So let's get to it. Let's start with a quick recap. So in episode 5, we were covering what free markets are. So what is capitalist society and all of that. And we really looked into detail into what is called the seller-buyer relationship. Our sellers being business and our customers being buyers. And we found that what's really important within this whole relationship is that customer preferences play a big influence on the types of products and services that a company is going to sell. They determine prices. They determine what type of products or services make it or not in a marketplace. So customers have a really big impact. And consumer preferences actually leads us to discussing our topic of today, demand and supply. Let's start off with supply. Supply is basically that amount or the quantity of which items or products that a supplier, such as a vendor or a manufacturer or a business owner, is actually willing to sell at different prices during a specific period of time. So let's use an example here. Let's say that we are a blueberry farmer. Okay. And as a blueberry farmer, we are seeing that we've got this thing called price and quantity that we are working with, these two factors. Quantity-wise, let's say we can produce roughly 10,000 strawberries within a year. Price-wise now, we need to be looking at how we're going to charge for our blueberries. We can't go and be like, oh, we're going to charge $1 per one little blueberry. Customers probably wouldn't want to pay $1 for one tiny little blueberry. So we have to look at different market factors. We have to look at what customers are willing to pay and things like that. And then we have to look at how that's going to be fitting into the price and the quantity about how many blueberries we're going to be selling. But before we get really into that, we've got this thing called a supply curve. So supply curves are basically studying the relationship between price and quantity that is being supplied. And it basically looks like this. On our vertical axis, we have price. So that's like the dollar amount or for not a currency amount. And on the horizontal axis, we have the thing called quantity, which is the number of products or the amount of products that we can supply. Basically, your supply curve is an upward shape. It's going to move up on this graph. And basically what we're saying here is that, for instance, let's look back at our blueberries. If we were selling 10 blueberries, quantity-wise, we, as a supplier, are willing to give those 10 blueberries at $10. But let's say now that we want to sell 60 of our blueberries. That means that brings us up to roughly here on our curve. And that says that we now are going to be paying about $45 per those 60 blueberries. So basically what this is telling us is that we can now say that all things being equal, that the higher our price is going here on our vertical axis, the more a business is going to be willing to supply. It just makes logical sense. If you're saying that I'm going to be supplying 70 blueberries in one go and I can charge that at $70, I would go for that. As a business owner, you want to be making more profits. So it logically makes sense. Now let's look at a different example. Let's say that our supply curve is slightly moved, okay? And let's say that this time, instead of blueberries, we are selling watermelon plushies. Yes. So let's say that here on the supply curve, we are going to be selling 10 of these. So quantity-wise, I've got 10 watermelon plushies as a seller or a manufacturer or a vendor or a business owner. I've got 10 of these and I want to sell these. Now, I'm going to charge roughly, if we look at our curve here, $5 for every single one of those 10 watermelon plushies. If I can go and say that instead I want to go and sell 50 of these, we can say that I can now charge these at roughly $25 per one, because of that fact that if all things are equal, the higher the price is on our vertical axis, quantity-wise, we will be able to supply more, because we are able to not only be able to afford it, but also because we want to charge more, because we want to make more income as a business. So that is basically how our supply curve will work. Now let's have a look at demand. So demand is basically that quantity or the amount of items or products or services that people, such as customers, are actually willing to buy at a certain price during a certain period of time. So let's bring back our example of the blueberries. I am a customer now. I am sitting on the opposite end of this. So I want to go to a business to purchase blueberries. For instance, we're somebody who's really, really healthy and we really, really like blueberries. That means that in off seasons when blueberries are not really found or they're not exactly the freshest, we are still willing to go and buy blueberries. But that means that we actually might be willing to buy that at a higher price or at a lower price, depending on the situation. So things like season can play a really big impact on both supply and demand. So for example, let's say that it's Christmas time. Christmas time, people are more focused on cranberries, for example. You won't see many people going for blueberries. So what is that going to do? That means that from a supplier point of view, we're going to be supplying less because, well, there's not a demand for it. So customers aren't going to be demanding blueberries in Christmas time. They're going to be focusing on cranberries. So that's how supply and demand would have to shift around. Now let's look at demand curves. So demand curves are basically studying that relationship between price and quantity demanded. So if we look at a demand curve, this is basically what we're going to see. We're going to still see price on our vertical axis and we're going to see quantity on our horizontal axis. But now the graph is the opposite way. So our curve is going to be going in a downward slope this way, not how our other slope was going. If you remember, our supply curve goes up that way. Demand curves go down in this way. Basically, this is how it works. If we say that we have 10 blueberries, at 10 blueberries, we can say that customers are willing to pay roughly $55. And if we move down the supply curve and let's say that at 40 blueberries, we can see the customers are willing to pay around $21 or so. So basically what we're saying by this is that all things being equal, that the lower a price is, the more willing a customer is going to be to buy it because demand is going to increase because it becomes more quantity. So think about it like this. Are you as a customer going to buy just 10 little blueberries at almost $55? Affordability wise, that doesn't sound reasonable. But if you go and tell me that at $21, I can go and buy 40 little blueberries, that sounds more reasonable from a customer perspective. I will demand that. That's where I want to be when it comes to our blueberries. So let's have a look at our other example again. Let's change this curve slightly and move it. So in this example, let's say that our demand curve is shifted slightly. As you can see, it's gone a little bit lower on the axis here. So let's say if we are selling our let's say that we are selling our watermelon plushies and we say that as a customer, there is 10 of them, okay? So interesting enough, let me just explain this. So let's say that if there's only 10 of them, they are kind of like a unique or a novelty kind of item. So that means that at 10 of them, I'm willing to pay $55 for them, or $50, roughly $50 to $55, because they are a unique item. There's not a lot of them around. But if I say that as a customer, I am willing only to pay perhaps $25. That means that our quantity is going to increase to 30 of these watermelons. So that basically brings us back to the same principle, that the lower the price is, the more willing customers are going to be to actually buy that kind of product, because it's becoming more affordable. It's also not becoming such a novelty item that you can only reach a certain target market. Because with novelty items, or with things that are really super unique, let's say for example a Rolls-Royce car, not the average person is going to be going out there to actually buy a Rolls-Royce car. That's something that's a little bit more like a luxury item. So those type of things can be charged at a higher price. They also come in limited quantities. But for example, if you just have a watermelon plushie, and let's say that a whole bunch of other stores have watermelon plushies, then it's not exactly a novelty item, and that means that the price goes down. So your demand for it will increase because everybody can buy it. Your target market has increased, and it's also become more affordable. But that means that you are going to have to supply more of these as a business. So that's how demand curves work. And that basically brings us to this other thing called equilibrium. So equilibrium is basically taking our demand curve and our supply curve and putting them together on the same axis. And where those two graphs intersect, or where they cross, that little point is actually called equilibrium. And that's where we can see our equilibrium price or equilibrium quantity. And normally this is that price where we will set our product or service at, because that's the price that customers are willing to buy, the average market price, in other words. So if we go and we combine our supply and demand curves together, it'll look something like this. This is our demand curve, the pink line, and this is our supply curve, the green line. Equilibrium happens right over here where we see them intersect. So that is designated by our purple little spot there. And basically what that's telling us is that if we are going to be supplying our green line, we are able to supply a quantity of 40 blueberries, for example. And if we see looking at demand, our pink line here, that intersects at roughly $21 or $22. So that means that customers are demanding 40 blueberries at $22. Now let's look back at our example for our watermelon plushies and shift the graph a little bit so that it gives you a different type of example to look at. So as we can see, here is our demand curve and here is our supply curve. Now, intersecting, they intersect here. And let's say that means that quantity-wise, we are able to sell roughly about 38 of our plushies. And they have to be sold at around $17 or so. So that is basically how you will work it out. You'll say that your equilibrium price is this point here. And your equilibrium quantity is this point over here. And this equilibrium point is going to keep shifting. Whenever your demand curve or your supply curve shifts, that point is going to change. So in this instance, we are having a market price at $17. And we have an equilibrium quantity that we as suppliers need to be having there at a roughly 38 units of our watermelons. So this is how demand and supply work from that type of perspective. And that's where we're going to be ending for today. Thank you for joining me. I know that this can be a little bit confusing, especially when we start getting into like curves and stuff, but we're focusing mostly on business in this series. So we're not going to go into too much more detail with numbers and figures. So don't be too scared about that, because I know a lot of people are scared of numbers. I'm included. So yes. So basically, next week, we're going to be looking still at our mini-series, and we're going to be focusing in on different types of societies, or well, different types of economies and societies that exist, like socialism. And we're going to just have like a brief look and discussion around those different types of topics. And yeah, so I wish you guys all the best for the next week. Hope to see you guys again soon. Bye-bye, and thank you for joining me. Bye.